welcome to our next presentation. Today we're going to be talking about project challenges from a right-of-way perspective. My name is Holly Cataldo, and I'm the Director of Land and Right-of-Way Services for Mazer Consulting, and I work out of the Charlotte, North Carolina office. And I'll be assisted today by Jared Estes, who is our right-of-way lead in Georgia for the Q&A portion of the presentation. So today we've got several project challenges to talk through. Now, we all go through some of the same project challenges. However, we wanted to discuss how a land services team thinks about these challenges and how we can provide a necessary perspective that can benefit your projects. Obviously, this list is not inclusive of all project challenges, but they're the ones that we felt most important to discuss in the time slot that we had today. So public perception. When starting a project, one of the most sensitive challenges to overcome is public perception. We have to plan for the best and prepare for the worst. Oftentimes we hear, my property's not for sale, talk to my lawyer, get off my property. There can even be dangerous situations presented to a land team. So our role is to acquire land that's not typically for sale, but it is possible to take an unwanted situation and have a positive outcome. An experienced land team will come prepared and will be able to guide the landowner through the process with empathy and professionalism. Whatever the reason behind the landowner's perception, we must be empathetic and understand what the concerns are. We must be slow to speak and eager to listen. A good agent will make sure the landowner has all of their questions answered while remaining professional through the entire process. We must know the project. Being able to explain the project impacts, having a good understanding of relevant land values, and the overall right-of-way process will help us establish a trustworthy relationship with the landowner. And as a land services team, we're always working as an extension of our client. So we've got to put our best foot forward to create a positive experience out in the public. Staffing challenges. So staffing is always a challenge in the right-of-way industry. It's a niche market, and therefore staff is always competitive. It's important that our projects are staffed according to the project size and complexity, project schedule, and anticipated project challenges. So having a candidate database is key to being able to call upon agents in a desired location or on a short notice. Building relationships with agents keeps them coming back. Everyone wants a team that they can trust and have experience working with in the past. So having these relationships allows for the project to be more streamlined. And most projects will require staff with specialized experience or a certain experience level. So we could have specific state licensure requirements that play a key factor when we're selecting staff for a project. Offering competitive pay and benefits keeps them on the project and they're not looking for the next best thing. A lot of times, some of our projects are staffed for that specific project, so it's really important that we're able to put them on the project from the beginning and keep them on the project till the end. And then, of course, everyone wants to feel a part of the team, so having supportive management from the top down will help facilitate the team environment that we all want to work within. And location. Some ask, does location really play into your planning? And yes, it does. We could have a project that's located in a low-income area that may make having relocation claims very difficult, or we may have unique circumstances happening in the community. We have to look at the challenges that we can expect within the area that we're working. And it can also take us back to the staffing discussion because the location could impact the way we staff our project. And then something else we consider is the type of weather in the project location. We hear about snowbirds, and it is a real thing when it comes to right-of-way. We try to make face-to-face contact with each landowner, and therefore coordinating when they're local is key. So if you have a project in the Northeast or a project in Florida, knowing when they're going to be in town and what their travel schedule is going to be key to making that face-to-face contact. And then something else to consider is winter weather or hurricane season. Sometimes projects halt or they slow if there's a weather event, or damage has occurred. So this is something to discuss early on, like what you can anticipate when you're planning your project. Title matters. So title work is very challenging by itself. Chain of title is the story of the land that the land can't tell itself. Complicated title can create project headaches. And if you do not consider title early on, you may end up with an issue that creeps up on you and delays the project. As land agents, we must have difficult conversations with the landowner to investigate the information we find in our preliminary title searches. Some of the title issues that we uncover could be public record errors, bankruptcies or foreclosures, unknown heirs, discovered leases, could have boundary or survey disputes, intestate concerns, or we may need to go through a release or subordination on a lien or a mortgage. So all of these issues are going to create additional time that we need to be able to acquire the land with clear title. You know, as a land services team, making sure that we acquire land with clear title is our due diligence to our client. Understanding local requirements in the project area is important on many levels. Some of the projects can cross different political jurisdictions. We may have rezoning issues or permitting challenges. Having to go through a local board approval is something else to consider. It could take a month to get on an agenda, another month to go before the board. So if you don't plan accordingly, you could delay the project. So it's very important to investigate these required approvals during your preliminary planning. Another challenge is that sometimes the client isn't sure of exactly what they need. And so part of our scope may be to help navigate that undefined process for them. So each jurisdiction is going to have its own set of regulations. So therefore, knowing that the local requirements early on will save you time in the end. Accelerated schedules are becoming the new trend, but the land acquisition phase can only be condensed so much. Depending upon the project type and the project funding, we may be required to adhere to specific guidelines. It is extremely beneficial to involve the land team in the pre-planning phase to begin early dialogue from our perspective. This can uncover external bottlenecks that can create delays from the right-of-way side. One thing that we can do is we can investigate parcels with an early site visit, and we can do this using preliminary plans. We look for areas of concern or areas that we would like to avoid. We want to make sure that the design team has accounted for the field conditions that we have observed. Some typical issues that we may come across are impacted septic areas that maybe we can avoid by a small design change. Maybe there's new construction that hasn't been accounted for yet, or maybe there's livestock impacts to consider, special businesses that may need special considerations, or maybe we have complicated relocations that may require more time to move. I could keep going, but I think you get the idea that there's a large range of things that we could uncover during an initial site visit that can be a huge advantage to the project. We need to determine if the proposed critical path is feasible from a right-of-way perspective. The contractor or the client may have a specific critical path, but does that work with our realistic land acquisition schedule? Will the project be phased? If so, what does that phasing look like? You know, knowing the overall construction plan along the corridor will determine our workflow and then where we focus our efforts initially and then throughout the project life cycle. So again, this all goes back to early communication with the land team to talk through these anticipated project challenges and set a realistic schedule. One example that I wanted to bring up was years ago on a project. I was working with a contractor and I was looking at his schedule that he had outlined in his Gantt chart, and I'm looking at it and I remember mentioning, I said, well, where is right-of-way in your schedule? And he said, you know, I don't need to put right-of-way in my schedule. And I said, well, right-of-way would go here, and this is what we're looking at as far as time frame, and this is what we can anticipate. And if you could have seen the expression on his face, I'm not sure that he ever left right-of-way out of a schedule again. So just making sure we're having those conversations with our clients and making sure that we're all on the same page as far as what the realistic schedule is going to be very critical to the project. And so the land team's expertise can help navigate the design team to final plans that can result in client cost savings. We must dive further into our project planning to explore other options that can help us work within a tighter schedule. We can look at adding additional resources, also known as crashing. This means we can assign more resources to an activity to decrease the overall time to complete it. We can also look at overlapping tasks or phasing tasks so that they run parallel rather than sequential. Also, this is known as fast tracking. We can also look at automating any repetitive task. We touch on this in more detail on the next slide about automating our reporting to be beneficial for project management. You can look at assigning more complicated tasks first. Most staff start off a project with a lot of enthusiasm, so therefore completing more difficult tasks up front may make more sense if it fits the critical path. And then another option would be to ask for a second opinion. We can always ask a colleague to look at the project and see if there's if they can uncover an additional strategy to implement. Because I think for all of us, I mean, once you look at a project or you look at something for so long, you start to miss things. So definitely asking for a second opinion about strategy is really important. So with the accelerated schedules and the stricter budgets, I mean, we've got to monitor our progress closely. So implementing project tracking systems, which could include the project budget, milestones, or overall just project progression, can allow for immediate action to be put in place when the project begins to show signs of deviation. Tracking and maintaining the critical path will also play a key role to ensure the schedule is met. We can identify parcels that are required or have special provisions along the project corridor in real time, which is something that our clients want to see. We can track performance amongst the project team, which is also desirable to ensure that the staff stays on track and hit the project milestones, or determine if you have a staff issue. So on this screen, we show a screenshot of our M3 application that will be showcased in more detail in our next webinar series on Thursday. So something of this nature could help facilitate necessary tracking that we mentioned above. Plan changes can occur for numerous reasons. Are there new utility conflicts? Did the team discover a very expensive dwelling or facility within the project corridor? Are we working off preliminary plans? Or do we have a permitting or environmental issue that we discovered? So whatever the reason for plan changes, it can create project delays, which in turn can interfere with the let date or construction date. Asking questions related to the project plans early on will help us identify and organize accordingly. If plan change after work begins, it's important to communicate immediately with the client on the new critical path. This allows us to plan for the immediate, but stay ahead of the curve so we can strategize for the bigger picture. We must monitor the project progression. Proper monitoring is going to allow for immediate action. On any project, adequate management must be in place to guarantee the project is meeting the client expectations. So plan changes in an evolving project during the land acquisition phase can lead to a conversation about scope evolution or scope creep very quickly. If you're going from a scope of work that requires task A to C, and you start being asked to complete task A to F, you have scope creep or evolution. So for example, maybe your contract is for title work through negotiations only, but you were so good at your work that now you're being asked to take the project through closing. So you've encountered scope evolution, and that's a conversation to have with the client. So we all know that time is money. So this may require contract supplemental or renegotiating a contract. It can be a sensitive subject with the client. However, it is a very important conversation to have as soon as you determine that you're working outside of your negotiated contract terms. Pilot programs are one type of example because they tend to have scope evolution early on. The project is new to the client, and therefore the project workflow is changing based on lessons learned. So during contract negotiations, it's critical to understand the project task, the project schedule, ask the client about short-term and long-term expectations and whether they expect project changes and how the project could evolve over time. You know, answers to these questions may help to minimize unexpected scope progression. So lately, we've all seen funding decrease or projects halt. So states are suffering due to the loss in the gas tax revenue, which has dramatically reduced funding. We're seeing rate reduction requests occurring in some industries as clients look to save money for various reasons. Sometimes election year can dictate spending. Pilot programs tend to spend additional funds upfront because the workflow process is not refined. And so sometimes it needs to go through full iterations before best practices can be implemented. And so this can create a hold or a slow in the project until financials are balanced and the process is better understood. Decreases or loss of funding mid-project is a huge challenge, but if you have adequate billing milestones, you're managing the project budget effectively, and you're not overstaffing, and maybe you've diversified your work, hopefully this will help you navigate these choppy waters. So there's definitely a lot more that we could talk about on these challenges, go in more detail. I mean, obviously there's a lot more challenges that we could talk about, but I hope that I was able to share how important it is to engage a land services team early on when you begin your planning. We all approach projects based on our specific disciplines, but adding additional perspective can only benefit your project. So I'm going to open it up to questions now.
Okay, thank you, Holly. We have a few questions here. I think the first question I could go ahead and direct it to Jared. This question is from Chris, and his question is, what has been the most challenging aspect of a project for you?
Thanks, Maria. I think Holly, I think she hit on it pretty well, is involving a right-of-way team early on. We get a lot of clients, local private firms, to name a few, that tend to involve us late in the process. But if we can be involved early on, for instance, in a preliminary field plan review, we can spot a lot of issues, whether it's jogging a permanent easement line to miss 10 or 20 parking spaces, or reducing right-of-way limits or easement limits to miss a backflow preventer. Things like that may seem really minor, but in the long run, I think it would. I mean, obviously, it ends up saving the project sponsor a ton of money at the end of the day, but also to your schedule, and then it saves a lot of headaches from the relocation process, relocating that improvement per se before certification. If you're able to miss those type of things and mitigate those damages, it goes back to that, is that the property owner doesn't have to relocate it, and it saves a lot of people a lot of headaches at the
end. Thank you, Jared. This question, Holly, I think you could address this one. This is from Lisa, and her question is, how does relocation impact your project schedule?
I can take that one, Maria. So we touched on reload impacts very briefly on a few slides, but ultimately relocation can have significant impacts to a schedule. Obviously, depending upon the funding, if you're under federal guidelines, will really determine the specific process that we have to follow. But we really need to consider relocation in the very early stages of the project and planning. If we're under federal guidelines, I mean, sort of a rule of thumb is, 9 to 12 months to vacate a displacee under normal circumstances. But if you add in, a complex relocation, you could be looking at much longer. And again, it's all going to depend on location too. 9 to 12 months is very common in North Carolina, but it may not be common in some other locations. So location will be key. But it's definitely something that's going to be critical to the critical path, and something that we have to discuss with our client early on.
Okay. Thank you, Holly. This question is from Marwan, and I hope I pronounced it correctly, and I apologize if I don't. So this is a little bit of a long question. So it is, how would you approach landowners about a gas main easement with the landowners telling us they have future developments on their property? Have you witnessed a similar situation? What is the best way to negotiate this? Either landowner requests a large amount of money, or the easement must state that the company must relate, well, sorry, I'm trying to speak.
Yeah, that is a long question.
So did you get the gist of it?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like that there is a little bit of research that we would need to do on our end on that one. You know, as far as the plan development goes, we actually have a very similar situation like that on a project. So because that answer is probably a little lengthy, I'm more than happy to share my email with the attendee so that we could talk a little bit more in depth offline.
Okay, great. And I'll make sure to get the contact information.
Perfect. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Another question is from Michael, and his question is, where have you seen automation been implemented in a project, and how has it helped to complete it?
Yeah, and so when I refer to automation, I mean, I really mean about, you know, a lot of it is the software that we use to be able to output data that would be just repetitive on our end if we were using Excel or, you know, a Word file. So I know that there are all sorts of platforms that float around in the right-of-way industry that we use that can help automate some of our reporting and also provide real-time reporting for our client based on our progression throughout the life cycle of the project. So that's what I'm referring to when I talk about automation.
Okay, thank you. A question from Gail. Any suggestions on how to educate design and construction teams about the right-of-way process?
Jared, do you want to take that one?
And I wanted to hit on something else too with the automation. I think that what we're trying to do here in Georgia, I know that from the department standpoint, our office right away, it's just what Holly said, is that we've got a lot of paperwork that involves with each parcel. And so when you're working on a 200-300 parcel projects, as we're seeing now, that really bogs you down. That bogs the agent down in the right of way team. So I think if we can consolidate those processes and streamline them all together, it's going to make for us to be more efficient in how we handle our paperwork on the back end. Going into the next question, what we try to do in our group is do a lot of do as many lunch and learns as we can. With design firms, with construction firms, with whoever would like to know more about the right-of-way process. And I encourage anybody on here that would like to learn more information about that. I think that we would be able to do that, albeit from a virtual standpoint now, just from what we're doing and what we're all going through. But definitely, I think if you have professionals that are able to devote time to talk about those things, how to involve a right-of-way group early on, what things would we want to see early on? How can we help you, and what value will we add to your team if we're involved early on in the process?
Thank you, Jared, and thank you, Holly. Did you have anything to add, Holly, to Jared's answer?
Nope, he did really good.
Okay, great. I believe that concludes. I don't see any other questions coming in from the attendees, so I think that concludes the Q&A portion. Holly, do you want to have any last minute comments or remarks?
Yeah, I just wanted to say I appreciate everybody tuning in today, and I hope that you were able to take something away from the presentation. Again, there's a lot more challenges that we could have talked about today, and we could have gone into more detail, but just limited on time. But again, appreciate you tuning in. Hope you all have a great week, and join us on Thursday as our GIS team talks about the M3 application. Thank you, everyone.